It has been 3 decades since Chuck Close first left his indelible mark on the art world with his 1968 big self-portrait. The almost 9-foot canvas was the first of his signature portraits of photographs. His large-scale pieces are characterized in part by their minimalist form and meticulous detail. They move back and forth between reality and artificiality, representation and abstraction. He was born in Monroe, Washington in 1940. He came east to attend Yale University's graduate program in the early 1960s. In 1988, an artery in his spine collapsed, paralyzing him from the neck down. He returned to the easel while still in the hospital and has continued to paint ever since, some say better than ever. The Museum of Modern Art is currently featuring a retrospective of his work entitled Chuck Close. I am enormously pleased to have this man at this table. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So how are you? Last night, Museum of Modern Art here in New York City, a place where they've had incredible retrospectives. I name a couple of fellow artists, Picasso and Matisse, among others. You're there. Your work's there. What was it like?
Wow, it's pretty amazing. Especially that I produced so few pictures. We had virtually, I would think, 80 or 90% of the paintings that I've made come back. Yeah. It's really all my babies coming back home.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen a lot of them since 1980. I've forgotten what some of them look like. I can't even remember having painted some of them. But it was really thrilling. It was great to be in the space. Rob Storr's brilliant selection and installation, I think, serves the work so well. I've learned so much about my own work from the way he installed it. And of course, it's a great context to have your work seen in. This is the big sandbox where everybody plays, and I'm glad to be in there.
Was it a sense of arrival for you in any way?
Oh, sure. I mean, when I came to New York at 20 years old in 1960, first place I went when I got off the train was the Museum of Modern Art, and it's every artist's fantasy, every painter's fantasy to have a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. So sometimes fantasies come true.
You said you've learned some things about your art and yourself from seeing the way these paintings are hung on those walls.
Well, the thing that I was most pleased about, because the work has changed over the years quite a bit, from the early continuous tone paintings, which many people think look quite photographic, through the late pieces that are incremental and built out of lots of colored shapes. But I was pleased that after I rolled through the whole show and came out the other end, I thought it looked like a career, and it looked like the same guy painted them, but at various, with various permutations and changes along the way.
We're going to get into this big time in this conversation, but give me a sense of how you see the sweep of this body of work.
Well, I think what you can see is an artist struggling to keep a degree of resistance in the work, a degree of an edge, difficulty. Ease is the great enemy of the artist, and when you get too good at it, you start just performing what you know you can do and demonstrating that you can do it yet again and again. What you can see in this show is a series of works, and then an attempt to alter some variables, keep myself engaged, keep myself off balance, reintroduce a little degree of difficulty and a little resistance so that I could get re-engaged with my work, and so it had urgency again for me, and I was able to move for another few years. I've been protected from the buffeting winds of change in the art world. Art movements come and art movements go. I just have my own odd path, my own trajectory, and it sort of doesn't matter what's going on out there, and I just let it evolve. When
you started doing what you call heads, it was portraiture to most of us.
Yeah. I was had a little trouble with the term.
All right, yeah. So you did.
Well, I didn't see myself, I didn't make commission portraits. I don't paint college presidents or...
you don't take commissions, do you?
I don't take commissions. I wouldn't want to deal with the ego if someone wants to have a 9-foot high image of themselves hanging around the house. and they're spending big bucks for these things. They'd want their complexion fixed and their nose straightened. So these are simply my friends and family who lend me their image without any control over what I'm going to do with it or how many times I might recycle it. And that's a great, great, generous gift of all these people, because these are not always easy to deal with, not easy to see yourself spread across canvas.
Let me go back to the beginning, because what's amazing about you is that you have known for a long time what you wanted to do. Mm-hmm. There is the story that when the Saturday Evening Post would come to your house in Washington State, you would try to figure out how they made the photograph. You'd look at it under a microscope.
Actually, at that point, they were still using on Collier's and Saturday Evening Post and Look, they were using painted covers, and it was the fact that these were paintings, and I hadn't seen any real paintings, or very few, that I realized that this was a language, a pictorial language, that I could decode. And if I looked closely enough, I could see the brushstrokes and I could see how they made these paintings. So that was really my first interest in. I realized it was a language that I could possibly use myself.
Then your parents, at 5, gave you an easel.
My father built me my first easel. I was 5 years old, yes.
So,
and then shortly after that, I saw a cheap set of student-grade oil paint in the Sears Roebuck catalog. It came in a wooden box. Boy, I wanted that. I wanted it big time, and I nudged them until I got it. Yeah.
Do you have any idea why you knew that this was what turned you on?
Well, you know, I wasn't very good at anything else. Often I think people describe people like me as being focused. What focused really usually means is we're pretty narrow. We don't have a lot of other things we can do. I've never gone off on a tangent because I never felt that I had any other skills to fall back on. And once you know that all your eggs are in this basket, the degree of commitment is greater than most of your peers, and you begin to be singled out just because of the intensity of your commitment.
This is some variation of nothing focuses a concentration like a hangman's noose.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
All right, so you come east, you go to University of Washington, yes, or Washington State?
University of Washington, yeah.
And study what?
Painting.
All right.
Yes.
Then you had a summer, I guess you came to Yale, and then you came back
right.
to graduate school of
they
architecture.
have a wonderful thing at the Yale Summer School of Music and Art up in near Litchfield in Norfolk, Connecticut. And it brings usually 25 or 30 artists from various schools in their junior year from around the country, all those egos into one room, and then sort of duke it out for the summer. And that became sort of out-of-town tryouts for Yale. They had a chance to see people who would be applying to graduate school at Yale, and they knew whether or not they wanted to accept them. So on the basis of having not screwed up too much that summer, I guess I was able to get into graduate school at Yale.
67, you come to New York to live?
67, after a year on a Fulbright in Vienna and a couple of years of teaching in Massachusetts, we moved to...
You wanted to be here where art was happening.
You bet.
And then the portrait that opens the exhibition, painted in 1968. Take a look at this. This is you, self-portrait. What drove you?
No wonder my wife's parents were thrilled when she brought me home.
Oh, I met the Roses last night. For those who said this is photorealism, you were the first to say...
Well... I guess it means something. It's not my favorite term. No artist of any stripe likes to be categorized or pigeonholed or named. I had trouble with the word realist because I was simultaneously as interested in artificiality as I was with reality. Yeah. And it's always been this tension between the distribution of marks on a flat surface and then how it warps into a head and makes space, and we can relate to it through a life experience and not an art experience. It's that tension back and forth that I've always been interested in.
You have also said that in the end, I'm making a painting here, folks.
You bet.
That's what we're doing here. We're painting.
I only wanted to hang... I think it's why I had trouble thinking of myself as a portrait painter. Here was this long tradition and convention of making portraits, And I just wanted to hang on the wall next to Agnes Martin or next to de Kooning. I mean, I just wanted to hang up there with the best stuff that was being made at the time. And I hoped that my work, simply as paintings, could stack up with the better work being done. That was my ambition. It was never my ambition to be, the best-known portrait painter in the country.
You just wanted what you put on the wall to hang, to compare.
Absolutely.
To say, your work would say, I deserve to be here.
Well, I hoped it did.
I mean, that's what you wanted to say.
Absolutely. I wanted people to think it deserved to be there.
You also painted of such a size, it demanded what?
Well, people ask me why the paintings are so big. I've always sort of only half facetiously said the bigger they are, the longer they take to walk by, and therefore the harder they are to ignore.
Yes.
Now, I don't care whether they loved them or they hated them, but I didn't want them to miss them. I didn't want to say, oh, was there a Chuck Close in that show?
If there was a Chuck Close, you knew it.
I wanted to grab them by the lapels and say, love me, hate me, look at me. But I think that's, in a way, there is the plaintive cry of the small child in most artists who's saying, I am here, I am somebody, I made this stuff. Won't you please look at it? And that's been true for 30 years for me.
But for a while there, you painted early on. Before this, you experimented with painting full body stuff, didn't you? A little bit.
Yep.
And then you decided why faces intrigued you, because you could see a life in a face.
Well, I had this 22-foot long reclining nude, and I was committed to something which I thought was typically American in painting at that moment, which was a sense of all-overness without any hierarchy. Jackson Pollock, Frank Stella, black paintings, whatever. You'd start on one side and you get off on the other, but nothing much had changed in terms of intensity or whatever. So I tried to apply that to the figure, and I tried to make the kneecap just as interesting as a nipple. And I wanted to make it so big that you couldn't readily see it as a whole. So it was a Brobdingnagian experience, like little Lilliputians crawling over the body of a giant, not even knowing what they were crawling on. But I found that my effort to make the painting equally important all over probably wasn't going to work with the nude. And also the scale. No, no, you know how we are. We congregate in certain areas.
Yes, we do. The eyes fall, don't they?
Yeah. So, and I still thought the scale of the painting, even at 22 feet long, was still too small, not ripped loose from the normal context enough. So I decided the head was the most obvious part of the body to use, and I just started there.
When did you start using the grid?
Grid has been there from the beginning, from day one. You didn't necessarily see it in the early paintings because the edges of the incremental unit were fudged and disappeared, so they appeared to be continuous tone and seamless. But in fact, they were built out of chunks, blocks, grids.
Mm-hmm. What you do is you take a photograph, a picture, and then you put it next to your easel. Mm-hmm. You still, before the event, would sit down when you painted. You've been doing that. That was a smart move, too, there, sir.
You're going to spend 12 or 14 months on a painting, you're going to sit down. I'm not that dumb.
You take the photograph, about 2 feet?
Yeah, usually 18 by 24, 20, 24, something like that.
Then you put the grid on the photograph.
Yeah.
And then you put the grid, lay out the grid on the big canvas.
A corresponding grid in a much larger scale, of course, because the canvas is bigger than the photograph.
Right. Before we show that process, a couple of things about the photograph. You select whom?
Well, I'm not going to paint. I'm not going to put 4 months to 12 months into an image of someone I don't care about. And I'm going to take the picture and engineer into it those issues that I'm going to want to try and work on in the painting.
So you take about 70, 80 photographs?
Well, not that many, because they're pretty expensive. I take them with a large Polaroid camera so that within 60 seconds, a 20 by 24 print rolls out the other end. This is an intimidating camera about the size of an old Volkswagen Beetle that you shove right at the subject. And but the interesting thing is that these photographs go up on the wall. The sitter and I both have a chance to see what we just have done. Whereas normally with film, it's captured on the film, but you have to go process it and print it later. So there's a dialogue from the very beginning. The sitter says, "Oh my God, you have to make me look like that," and or how about if I turn my head like this? And so we start building an image together, the two of us.
In terms of taking the photographs?
Taking the photograph, yep.
So if they say, I don't like that because of this, then you'll take another photograph?
Say, I don't care. You're not commissioning me.
Yes, that's right. It's my photograph.
That's right.
I'm the painter.
Yeah. But I try to listen to them a little bit. They can lobby for what they want. But I am plagued with indecision. I cannot order in a restaurant. And what you have always looks much better than what I have on my plate. But I've never had any trouble picking a photograph. There's always one photograph that's the best one to make a painting from. And sometimes I photographed people many, many times and never gotten the photograph that I want to work from. Just keep trying, try it again. Some other person that maybe I was far less interested in painting, I thought, I would photograph, and the first photograph out of the camera ached to be made into a painting. So, but it's always an interesting dialogue between the.
And what are you looking for? A moment.
Some images are more compelling than others. You just say, "Oh wow, look at that." Yeah. Some edges are more interesting formally. The hair has makes all kinds of interesting shapes or something like that.
There is going to be a film about you on WNET later. The filmmaker Marian Kajori has generously provided this documentary footage. This is a couple of minutes showing you the process of this great contemporary artist at work. Here it is. Trust in me. Talk about this. This is your studio.
This is my studio. It's a wheelchair-equipped studio. I have a easel that goes through the floor and allows the paintings to go move up and down. And I have the greatest freedom because I can move around, move from left to right, and raise and lower the painting with a foot pedal.
Yeah. And you're now putting on the thing.
I'm putting on a wrist brace, yeah, which is a standard orthotic off-the-shelf device, which holds the brush. You can see the tape going on the painting, which indicates where I am because I get lost sometimes. Row 24. Space 5. There's a corresponding space in the photograph. But there is no direct translation from the photograph to the painting. It doesn't look much like the photograph.
But there is, you also never have to pull back to take a look at it. You know what the color looks like even though you're up close.
Well, yeah, people ask me how I can make all these decisions arm's length away. I think it's a little like a composer going into a room to score and assigning a certain note to an oboe, another note to a bassoon. He or she knows what those notes played together are going to sound like, what chord that will make. And I'm making the visual equivalent of a musical chord, it's a kind of color chord, of colors and shapes combined, that I know what they're going to read like from a distance.
So, I mean, after you've done this long enough, if you're any good at all, you know what it looks like.
Yeah.
And each of these...
And if I did back up to see how it's going, I'd never get them done. You know, the only way I can finish them at all is if I stay right up there working.
When you... Takes you, what, a year to do a big piece?
Depends. Some have taken 12 or 14 months. These paintings right now are taking about 4 months.
You're working now on a portrait of Jasper Johns.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The exhibit, the retrospective, entitled Chuck Close, begins with a self-portrait and ends with a self-portrait. Mm-hmm. Here you are, again, thanks to Marian Kajori, working on a large self-portrait. Roll tape. Tell me about this. Tell me,
well, here
describe what you're doing.
You can see that some color is underneath. It's sort of capricious and arbitrarily chosen. It just means that I'm going to react to that color later. And in a series of 2 or 3 or 4 correcting moves, I will try and move it from this color that's wrong to something that reads the way I want. It's It's a process. Actually, I must hate to say this, but sort of based on golf.
Golf?
Golf is the only sport that moves from general to specific in an ideal number of correcting moves. The first stroke is just out there. Second one corrects that. The third one corrects that. By then, you're on the green, hopefully. And you place, in 4 or 5 strokes, you place the ball in this very specific 3.5-inch diameter circle, which you found by walking through the landscape. And I am trying to make 3 or 4 or 5 correcting moves to slowly move each one of these. It's just like kind of a par 4 hole through those corrections to arrive at the specific color world that I want in that piece. I'm also putting English on the stroke, which makes the drawing.
Because there is you know so much about golf?
I used to be caddy when I was a kid.
But go ahead. Each of those little squares, you sometimes use your fingers. Use your thumb.
I used to use my thumb.
Finger painting.
Yeah.
So
my fingers don't work anymore, so I can't really do that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the difference today after '88. One day in 1988, correct? You had a stroke.
Well, it's not really a stroke. A stroke, it's kind of like a stroke. It's a spinal artery collapse, cutting off the flow of blood, knocking out a lot of nerves, and pretty much leaving me wheelchair bound, and my wrists and fingers and hands don't work. And virtually every muscle group from my chest down is compromised to one degree or another. But
I'm watching you here after the event. Everything you say is different now after the event. What's different about painting?
Well, actually, everything is different, but painting's pretty much the same. Yeah. Because I have a lot of control over what I do in the studio.
And because
out in the cold, cruel world, you don't have so much control. But I must say that that it's also largely become because I was already somebody. I was already a well-known artist. I'd already had a museum retrospective that toured the started at the Walker and ended up in the Whitney in 1980-81. I'd been I was in many museum collections, and for me, all I had to do was be able to get back to something that I already knew how to do, and so it was just a case of getting some modifications and some equipment. But luckily, I was successful, and I made enough money that I could hire the help that I needed and outfit a studio that I could be independent in. Another artist who'd want to get back from something devastating like this might have had the same kind of commitment, the same desire to get back, and would have been unable if he or she didn't have the resources.
And you knew there was no sentiment value either, because you'd already been good. So they weren't saying this is good, keep going because we feel sorry for you.
Well, I always was worried about the sympathy vote, and I think there is a lot of goodwill towards me out there. I think a lot of people are pulling for me, and my friends and family and fellow artists who I've painted for years have been really supportive and sustaining. And my wife fought in the hospital to get the occupational therapist to get me back to work. Boy, she was in there fighting every inch of the way. So I've had a lot of support from Arnie Glimcher, my dealer, all throughout this whole process. Support from the Museum of Modern Art. The Museum of Modern Art bought the first large painting I did after I got out of the hospital.
There's a story that Kirk Varnado came to see you, and he was worried to death about coming over because he knew what you had done, and he didn't know if you'd ever do it again. Yeah. And you were already at work on something. Right. And he took part of that canvas back to the museum and said...
I think he was a little worried, and I think he was pulling for me, and he's hopeful that I had been able to get back to it. But he was extremely enthusiastic. as were some other people in the modern. And that was a kind of good housekeeping seal of approval that said, this is not just a sympathy vote. Nobody's going to buy a painting from a handicapped artist just to cheer him up.
You have said that the difference between painting and photography is what the work is about. Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
Well, you know, photography is happens all at once. It's almost like magic. You expose a blank sheet of paper and you put it into clear liquid, and all at once this image comes up. And after all these years, it's still exciting. It's still a mystery to me how this works. A painting, on the other hand, is always unfinished until it's finished. And it happens in such a different way. And the process is so different. And the way you have to think, and the fact that you have the chance to see how each thing you add to what's already there changes what you have and anticipates what you're going to do next. And that process is really a thrilling ride for an artist to be on. And one of the things that makes artists such great viewers of another artist's art, because they know how it happened.
You are, more than anybody I know, with the exception perhaps of me, fascinated by process. Mm. And you also think it's instructive.
Well,
which is the point you were just making.
When you're stuck, you alter the process, you go someplace else. Mm. And I've never had artist block, and I've never allowed myself to just work on the days I felt like working. You know, if you engage yourself in a process and follow it where it goes, you're going to be swept along for a while. You're going to make something different because you took that particular path.
Today, it used to be, the story was, that people were painting photographs. Mm-hmm. Now they're photographs in a sense of what you're painting. They're trying to achieve with photography what you're painting.
Oh, you mean digital imaging?
Yeah, exactly, all that
right,
stuff.
Yeah. Well, I am a technophobe and a Luddite of the first order.
You fear it all, do you?
Oh, I hate it all, and I am not interested in labor-saving devices. In fact, I find ways to put new rocks on my shoes all the time, and I'm always trying to slow the process down. Although I think computers often slow them down too. But some people have been generous in suggesting that my work prefigured a kind of digital age, and that some of the reasons why people might be interested in it is that it seems to have something to do with that. But it's all done up here. One of the things that happened when I became paralyzed, I thought, you know, how am I ever going to work? My hands don't work. And somebody said to me in the hospital, and I wish I knew who it was, "You'll be all right. You paint with your head and not with your hands," and it's really true. We all do.
Thank you so much for coming here.
My pleasure.
It's a great pleasure to have you.
It's
an extraordinary exhibition. You can get a sense of an artist because there is enough there. In a sense, it's larger than life, but also it's comprehensible because, as you say, how many works of art there?
I think there are 90 unique works and about 25 prints. There's a separate print exhibition that the curator Deborah Y did in the print room also.
Chuck Close, thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Coming up, a conversation we had at the Guggenheim Museum with Robert Rauschenberg. An extraordinary program this evening, two great living artists. We'll be right back.